In the 8 months since an army of diehard MAGA supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol in an attempt to overturn the presidential election, more than 550 people have been charged with federal crimes. Those charges range from trespassing and destruction of government property to conspiracy, assaulting law enforcement, and use of a deadly weapon. In the upside-down world we are living in now, some on the right are still trying to tell us that those pictures, these pictures you see right here on your screen, do not actually depict an insurrection, and that those arrested are actually political prisoners. And worst of all, they're coming back in 2 weeks.
We have our next rally planned. It's in the middle of September, September 18th, and it's going to be huge. And what's going to define it is where it's going to take place. We're going back to the Capitol, right where it started, on September 18th. And we're going to push back against the phony narrative that there was an insurrection.
Yeah, great. As we told you last week, the D.C. police are going to increase their presence for this supposed peaceful demonstration. It's a good thing, too, because as the Associated Press reports, far-right extremist groups like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers are planning to attend. For more, I'm joined by Scott McFarland, investigative reporter for NBC4 Washington, and Clint Watts, former FBI special agent and MSNBC national security analyst. And Scott, I want to start with you on just the where we are with these cases. Before we get into what's going to happen on September 18th, there are more and more high-profile members of this original siege on the Capitol that are coming to trial. Give us the latest update on that.
A series of plea agreements scheduled for next week, and one high-profile plea agreement today. Jacob Chansley, the so-called QAnon shaman, an eccentric case from the start, in part because he was wearing a headdress, horns, and red, white, and blue face paint. He pleaded guilty to one felony count, obstruction. He'll be sentenced in November. The estimate right now, Joy, roughly 4 years in prison. That's the sentencing guideline the judge will have to work with. But here's the thing, and this ties into September 18th. We spoke with his defense lawyer a couple hours ago. His defense lawyer says one of the obstacles to getting Chansley to plead guilty is that others close to Chansley were telling him, don't plead guilty, wait for the pardon from Donald Trump. Here we are, 8 months later, that's still the mentality. And I've talked to a number of members of Congress over the last few days. They haven't yet been briefed on what the security protocols and upgrades are going to be for September 18th. But in light of that comment, and in light of all this chatter about justice for the Jan 6 defendants who are in the D.C. jail, there's a lot of people concerned about it.
Wow. Okay. Well, Clint Watts, having absorbed that, how concerned are you that since there are still people in Jacob Chansley's family, while he's facing maybe up to 4 years in prison, who are still saying Trump is going to be magically reinstated and pardon him, and that doesn't seem to have weakened at all in terms of the broader sort of movement that supports the January 6th conspiracies. How worried are you about this September 18th event?
It's hard to tell right now, Joy. I think next week is when we'll know how serious it is. But I can tell you this, since January 6th, there hasn't been a rally that's generated this much noise in the social media space for a lot of these groups until September 18th. That's the first one that's really gotten a lot of attention. The other thing is you're starting to see things like them making T-shirts, starting to do some of the paraphernalia around this given date. And you're having media personalities and politicians both talking about that date and a potential rally. So that's tipping and queuing, just like we saw around January 6th. Remember, it's going to be wild. That was a signal to be there. What I don't know, though, is how serious people will be. In some of these channels that you might watch on social media now, you have many antagonists who are saying, don't be so stupid to go to D.C. They're ready this time. Sort of speaking to the truth that, hey, we have a much stronger law enforcement presence now. There are lots of FBI investigations going on with co-conspirators. So I think the ones that do show up, those are the most hardened supporters. And they're also the ones that will believe absolutely anything. They will go into a complete alternative reality and pursue it no matter what the truth ultimately is.
And just for a moment on that, Laura Windsor does a lot of these sort of videos where she goes out and sort of pretends to be Lauren Windsor, who pretends to kind of be one of these MAGA people and talks to these members of Congress and sees what they're going to say. This is her talking to Jim Jordan about that rally. And it's interesting what he says when he thinks he's talking to a MAGA supporter about that rally. Take a listen.
Are you going to be there on September 18th?
September 18th. Is there a rally coming?
There's going to be another rally.
Oh, really?
So there's a big rally in D.C. for all the people that they're holding right now.
Well,
and not people that say they're tech officers, but like, yeah.
Get in on the 90 to 20.
So, I'm going to stay with you on this one, Clint, because it does seem that behind closed doors, when they don't think Donald Trump is listening, members of Congress are starting to understand that this might not be the smartest place for them to be, particularly when they've got potential subpoenas in front of them regarding what they did with the last insurrection.
That's right, Joy. The consequences for them criminally could be quite high, particularly as people have their eyes on them for incitement, for example. The other thing is, this is ultimately about fundraising and motivating around the next election. That's the only way to look at it. When you hear those comments, it was Johnson last week, I think. In this case, it's Jim Jordan. We know that it's a scam, and there's two fundraising mechanisms that are still powerful right now: the insurrection, not surrection, and voting recounts, like this fake audit down in Arizona. Those are the two mechanisms where they can keep people going. And for Steve Bannon and his media outlet, if he was not talking about the insurrection, what would he be talking about right now?
Right.
They're not exactly enhancing anything. So conspiracies are about all they have. It's COVID conspiracies, and what do you know? The more people talk about it, the more people die from it or get ill from it. You're actually killing off your audience over time. So they're running into a conundrum, I think, about what to actually talk about because they don't have any new ideas.
Yeah, but they still want to collect the money. And so, Scott, but the thing is that the people that they're selling this to, a lot of them believe it. A couple of cases here, well, one case in particular, this is one of the suspects. His name is Doug Jensen. And he was told he needed to stay off the internet. And this was all he needed to do. He's now back in jail. He was initially released prior to his trial on a precondition that he would stay off the internet. But he got caught in his garage watching the MyPillow CEO, Mike Lindell's cyber symposium on an iPhone. I wonder how much of this is going on in these court cases where we're seeing some people like Jacob Chansley try to walk away from QAnon and sort of backpedal. But, how many of these guys are still doubling down and, still spouting this stuff even as they're facing jail time?
It's a great question, Joy. Not only was Doug Jensen caught watching the Mike Lindell cyber symposium on an internet-connected phone when he was banned from the internet, he was caught the first time the court came to check on him. The first unannounced visit. He has disavowed QAnon, he says. Jacob Chansley has disavowed QAnon, he says. But I'm going to go back to Chansley again. His attorney specified that Chansley still has a soft place in his heart for Donald Trump. In his words, it's, quote, like your first love, you don't get over it. There's a mentality out there. And these are the defendants who were or are in pretrial detention. And that's what the group is coming for September 18th, Joy. They're coming to protest and ask the feds or the court or the jail to release the January 6th defendants. Now, this is not the first time we've had people in town for that reason. I met with a group that was here one Sunday earlier this summer outside the jail with their picket signs. They said they're trying to release the prisoners of Biden.
Yeah, and let's remind everyone that a member of Congress, Madison Cawthorn, mused about busting those people out of jail. So this is some dangerous stuff, and he's not going to be the brightest bulbs in the fixture, but they're being incited continually online and by some members of Congress. Scott McFarland, Clint Watts, thank you both very much. Have a great weekend.